as we gather here this afternoon in a special place, a place that holds deep meaning for us and a place that held deep meaning for our beloved Desey. We come to reflect on a long, fulfilling, spirited life that graced not only Desey's family, but our community. So many wonderful memories we share, stories, laughter, all the good that created a life for 86 years. For those who are here in our main sanctuary this afternoon, I invite you please to silence any cell phones you may have brought with you at this time. For those who are joining us via live stream, we're grateful for your presence that enables us to come together in a meaningful way as a community on this sad day. In order to set the tone for our service this afternoon, it's an honor for me to invite Cantor Kenneth Feibush to lead us in an opening psalm of consolation.
Adonai roi lo echsar vinod deshe arbitzeni al mei menuchot al mei menuchot in Nafshi shovev shovev yancheni v'magle tzedek yancheni v'magle tzedek niman shemo gam ki einech begeitz amavet lo irara ki ata imadi shivteha umishonteha heima yinachamuni ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged tzorerai dishanta vashemen roshi kosi revaya chesed yirdifuni koyemei chayai vishavti beveit Adonai leorech yamim. Adonai roi lo echsar Adonai roi lo echsar
Death has taken our beloved Desey. Our friends grieve in their darkened world. In their silence, there is lamentation. In their tears, there is loneliness. Lost in their sorrow, may they find the presence of loving friends. Hear them, O God, and be with them. For Desey's love that united us in life, and which death cannot sever, for his companionship that we shared along life's path, and which continues through the tenderness of memory, for the gifts of his heart and mind that brought us joy and happiness, and is now a precious remembrance. For all these and more, we give our thanks to God. In this time of our grief, we listen to the voice of our sacred scriptures that brings us the ever new message of God's nearness. It tells us of our kinship with the Creator, in light as in darkness, in joy as in sorrow, in life as in death. Adonai mi agor ba'ohalecha mishkon b'char kodshecha. Adonai, who may abide in your house, who may dwell in your holy mountain. Those who are upright, who do justly, who speak the truth within their hearts, who do not slander others or wrong them, or bring shame upon them, who scorn the lawless, but honor those who revere God, who give their word and come what may, do not retract, who do not exploit others, who do not take bribes. Those who live in this way shall never be shaken. We join together now in the reading of the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. In Job, we are taught, Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai mivorach. God has given, God has taken away. Blessed be the name of God. An ancient people, we are well acquainted with grief and with the valley of shadows. Death and sorrow are not strangers to us, yet the centuries have taught us that a good name endures beyond the grave, and that there is strength in faith. With Job, we say, Adonai lakach, God, you have given. You gave us a loved one who will not be forgotten. For all that was good and enduring in Desey's life, we offer the deepest thanks of our hearts. Adonai lakach, God, you have taken away. We pray for the strength to turn our broken hearts into an altar of trust, before which we acknowledge your sovereignty and love, as we now say, Yehi Shem Adonai mivorach, blessed be the name of God, now and forever. To know Desenberg was to know a giant of a man, large in personality, a genuine, kind, and compassionate human being. Desey was a mensch who valued the days of his life and made each one of them count. Desey was skilled and talented, and there was never a day that he didn't engage his mind and share his charm with his family and friends alike. He was loyal, generous, and thoughtful. Desey loved to laugh himself and always wanted others to share in his humor too. Desey was a native Houstonian and a very proud Texan. He was a graduate of San Jacinto High School, and he was on the ROTC drill team commander. He excelled in the ROTC program and earned a prestigious role within the organization. After his high school graduation, he went on to attend the University of Texas, where he earned his business degree. Desey was a proud Longhorn and always spoke fondly of his days at UT. Desey was commissioned as an ensign in the U.S. Navy and was honored to serve his country. He was a proud Navy veteran and remembered his time both as challenging and rewarding in the service. Returning to Houston, Desey was lucky to find love not once, but twice in his life. His marriage to Barbara was full of friends, adventures, and a lot of fun. Together they had 4 children, Douglas J., Julie, John, and Dana. The Desenbergs enjoyed times traveling around Texas, where they enjoyed boating, fishing, and water skiing. Desey worked for Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner, and Smith from 1960 until he retired 43 years later. Desey excelled in his professional life, and in the Southwest region was known as the legend. Desey would recall his time at Merrill Lynch with great pride. He valued his work and took great pride in all of his accomplishments. Of particular note was his time as a trainee in New York. He was taken with meeting New Yorkers who had never met Texans before. He made many personal connections when he was there that made it seem as though Houston was merely a southern suburb of the Big Apple. Desey could tell a story, and he certainly had a knack for remembering details despite the years that had passed. When he was in New York, he received a political button from the city mayor candidate that began a 60-year passion for collecting. Desey's buttons were on proud display in his home. Voting was an important value to him. As Desey experienced the sadness that comes in life, he also knew how to find joy again and again. This was especially true in 1989 when he met Carol at a Jewish singles party. They shared an incredibly special bond that began with a unique courtship. Desey warmly welcomed Carol's son Todd into the family, and together they created a blended home. It was one where there was a lot of laughter and a great deal of fun. Together, Carol and Desey shared 31 years of marriage together. They never took any moment or experience for granted. They both knew of the fragility of life and how to capture every moment. Family dinners and holidays weren't to be missed. There were wonderful trips to enjoy and memories to savor. As the family grew to include daughter-in-law Julie and grandchildren, Emily, Jeff, Eric, Haley, Kyle, Max, Ryder, Hope, Daly, and Harry, they always knew how to bring a smile to Desey's face. Desey's 2 special bonuses were his great-grandchildren, Hattie and Sophie. It was a large family and one that kept Desey on his toes. He did his best to offer sage advice and then to allow his kids to find their own way. He was supportive and loving, but also knew that he needed them to experience life in their own way. Desey believed firmly in the value of paying oneself first and shared this wisdom continually. In his 86 years, Desey developed a remarkable sense of spirituality. His neshama, his soul, was truly touched with the spirit of the divine. He took great pride in his Jewish heritage and was always driven to achieve all that he could. Beth Israel was a special place for Desey. It was truly his second home. Desey served on the board of the temple for 17 years and was membership chair. He was touched by this holy work. Over his years of health challenges and setbacks, he would call upon both Rabbi Lyon and me. We each developed a strong bond and connection with him. Desey was a deep thinker. He was philosophical. Desey loved to send Rabbi Lyon copies of articles, comics, or other snippets he felt would be helpful in sermon or bulletin articles. Desey was a selfless person. He always wanted to hear more about what was going on at the synagogue or the community, more than talking about himself. Desey reached out to me during the pandemic for help in planning the family's Passover Seder. He wanted to be sure that he included everything he needed to honor the essence of the holiday. Although not great at technology, Desey and I exchanged a few messages, and we worked together to create a solid outline for his family's Seder. Just last week, we had the chance to visit again. We talked for over an hour. We shared meaningful time where he acknowledged that the end was approaching. He wasn't scared or angry. Desey was peaceful. He truly had no regrets. He felt that he had achieved everything he could have ever wanted. And then Desey shared something with me that I will never forget. He said that God had been a great co-pilot in his life. Desey recognized the importance of God's presence, that it helped him lead a meaningful journey. He understood that God had predetermined certain things, but that there were many choices left to Desey. Desey, without any question, made solid decisions throughout his day. He was a mensch of the highest order. Desey's legacy is a great gift that will be cherished not only by his large and extended family, but by our entire community. Zichrono livracha. May Desey's memory be for a blessing today and always, as together we say, Amen. Now I invite some of Desey's family members to share some personal words and reflections. I'd like to first invite Dana and John to come forward.
Hello, everybody. How are you? Thank you for coming out. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is John Desenberg. I am one of Desey's 4 children. I want to say hello to my children who are watching on live stream. Hello, Haley and Kyle and Max. I think that Dad would think that's pretty incredible that people can watch this service from anywhere in the world. And technology, while he wasn't the greatest with technology, I think he appreciated it. And what it's done for the world. So in really no particular order, I wrote some things down, and I could say a whole lot, but some of the lessons that I learned from Dad, a couple, never be late. Don't ever be late wherever in the world you're going. And I do that to this day. Write everything down, absolutely. Dad introduced me to some of the things in my life that have been really important, loves of my life, obsessions, interests, whatever you want to call it. When I was 6 years old, 1973, I fell off the high dive at Westwood Country Club at summer camp, broke my left arm, and my summer was over. So feeling sorry for me, my father took me to see James Bond, Live and Let Die, which had come out that year, and he took me to see it 6 times in the theater. I couldn't get enough, and I've been a lifelong raving fan of James Bond ever since. My father was active with me and with us. I played soccer for a very long time. He was at all of my games. We did Indian guides together, and his Indian name was Walking Tall, and mine was Walking Small. And we go on this weekend Indian guides event. I don't know where it was in Texas. And as a part of this, we had to go up on this hill, and we were looking for Indian arrowheads, right? And this is, I don't know, how old was I? Probably 7 or so. It's like 1974. And all of a sudden, just miraculously, he says, "Hey, look there." I think he probably, threw one on the ground for the kid. One of the other, you can't really talk about my father without mentioning that he was a stockbroker. The love of his life was the stock market. And he couldn't tell you, and especially in his latter part of his life, he couldn't tell you what he had for breakfast. But if you got him started talking about his stocks, he had a miraculous recall of his 29 stocks, and he could tell you when he bought it, how much he paid, how much it's worth now, when it split, when it did this, when it did that, and he loved talking about it. And he introduced me to the stock market, as he did to my brothers and sisters, after my bar mitzvah, which happened right here in this room, in this congregation. And I bought my first stock with bar mitzvah money, and have been a fan of it ever since. I also had the pleasure and the honor of working with him in his last 8 years in his career. We were both at the same company. And yes, he was known as the legend. Anywhere I would go, anywhere in the country, because I traveled nationwide with Merrill Lynch and was a speaker for them and a trainer, everybody would be like, "Oh, you're Desey's son." And everybody knew him. And he was very well respected in the industry and in that corporation. It was really, really neat to talk to him about his lifetime in and around that career, and how he started in Beaumont and did his training in New York, and it's just the whole thing. He had a miraculous detail for that. Lastly, I do want to say a few things for my sister Julie. One of the things that they shared together was their love of the University of Texas. And when there was a game on, they would both be watching in their locations and texting, and it didn't matter if they would win or lose. They were really into it, and that was an important thing to both, that they had that connection, Julie and my father. And lastly, I want to say a thank you to Carol. I really do, that she was there, and she was there during a very tough period, especially at the end, and you just took great care of Dad, and I really appreciate it, and the family appreciates it. And I could talk forever, but Desey, one of the things, he didn't say this to me, he did say he was ready to move on to me when I was here in June, but that he had accomplished what he wanted to in life. There was nothing left undone. And I think if we could all get to the end of our life and say that, that would be amazing. So now let's hear from Dana.
I also want to thank everybody for being here. When I started to think what I was going to write, and I started thinking about kind of the life lessons that he taught me, and one is to always be prepared. This man, he was prepared for everything. And one is when she mentioned Passover. So when we would have Passover, we'd have people there sometimes that had never been to a Passover before. But this was his master copy of the Seder, and he would spend weeks in pencil assigning roles to everybody. And if somebody was added or couldn't make it, that was like a whole day of reshuffling. I mean, this thing is falling apart, but he really enjoyed it. And he did, for the first COVID Passover, he really did fret and wanted to make sure that, we could be safe. And I'm sure there were more than a couple of emails, because when he wanted to reach you, he got you, right? Yeah. The other is that he always taught me was that your word is your bond. And with him, if he said he was going to do something, he was going to do it. And that's what I try to live by. Because with him, his reputation and his fairness, and those are, when I think about what he taught me, that's what he taught me. And I carry that through every day. What's the fair thing to do? And, it's just a driving principle. Then the last one is, and we're all, I think, just all the time, never be late. If one time I'd make a game out of it to see if I could get to a restaurant before him. And sometimes I would go 20 minutes and then 30 minutes. You just couldn't do it. He was already there. He'd scoped it out. He knew where he wanted to sit. And so finally, I just gave up. I just couldn't do it. The memories that we have, we've talked, I think as Obituary mentioned, we liked water skiing. He loved boating. He loved to look at boats. But ironically, he could not dock a boat to save his life. And one time I remember we were, as the 4 kids and my mom, and it was lightning and thunder, and we're all going crazy, and he just couldn't. I mean, it just could not. So I think one of the boys had to finally come in and pull it in. But it was always interesting to watch the excuse that he came up with. It was the wind, it was this, but he enjoyed it. The other thing is his 85th birthday was December of 2020, right? Which was the first kind of Zoom or COVID birthday. And so Carol and I decided we were going to set up a Zoom call for his friends. And so I know a little technology, so I set up the Zoom, and I was amazed at how many people were on that call. There must have been 50 groups, and they were some were talking over each other, and my dad didn't quite understand, wait, where are these people? He kept looking, and finally he figured it out, and then I had to institute a raise your hand thing because everyone was just talking all over everybody. And then I gave him a copy of it on a memory stick, and he told me he just loved watching that, and it was amazing that he could be with his friends but not be with his friends, and I was amazed at how many we were able to get together. It was really a sight to see, and some of you are here today, so that was something he really, really liked. The other thing that he really liked was Wheel of Fortune, and actually Wednesday night, Carol and I sat with him, and we watched Wheel of Fortune, and he was solving the puzzles. I mean, he was sitting up and cracking jokes about Vanna White, and it was just amazing that up until the very end, his mind was sharp. It was very sharp. I've been thinking about, when he was diagnosed over a year ago, that we thought we were going to have a much shorter period of time to talk to him. But I think it was kind of a blessing to have a little more time, because I got to sit and talk with him, and he kept up on politics and jokes and what we were doing, and it was nice to kind of have that time to sit with him and just kind of get his view on the world, which was very interesting, and I really appreciated that time. Carol, you've been a rock. I know that the Desenberg, sometimes we can be a little difficult when we don't feel well. So I know that it was trying, and you did a great job, and he was happy, and you can't ask for anything else. Thank you.
And now I'd like to invite Todd to share some personal words.
Thanks. Sorry about that. Hello, everyone. I am Todd. Recognize a lot of you here, and if I don't know you, hope to talk to you later. I'll try not to repeat stuff that's already been said and be duplicated, but Desey would be very proud of everyone coming today and watching on the live stream, and he'd be so happy that everyone, it's a sad occasion to be celebrating his life. So we first met when I was 11 years old. I think I was in 6th grade, and my mom picked me up from school one day, and she said, "We're going to go to dinner with this guy. He's overweight and old, but just be good, and we'll be out of there. We'll be out of there in half hour or whatever." Well, and we went for Chinese food. It was good. And looking back, it was one of the best decisions she ever made, because, after the first 2 years of me pushing the boundaries to see what I could get away with and being pushed back, he was obviously a lot bigger than I was. We got along, and we had a great, father-son relationship until, Saturday. So my kind of theme of my speech was going to be like 10 things things he liked or was interested in. I know we've covered some of them, so I'll try to not go twice. So the University of Texas obviously has been mentioned several times. He would always tell me because I went to UT, and when I was in high school, he'd always tell everyone, if you give your best to Texas, the best will come to you. Well, I gave my best, and they asked me not to come back. Twice. The second thing and this is no order, it's just random order. The second thing he loved and would always love to talk about was the Navy. He loved being on that ship. He would tell you the deals he made with some other ship and how he got this much coffee for this much price, and no one could believe that the deal he made. I think he would have stayed on that boat forever if they'd let him. I mean, he absolutely loved, he had a replica of it in his room. He'd show you where he slept. The third thing he always loved to talk about was his childhood in Mahia, his summers in Mahia, his loved visiting his family there. Obviously, Merrill Lynch would be the fourth thing, talking about stocks and, similar to John, the bar mitzvah stock purchases, which of course I didn't hold on to. But some of the things he would say about the market is, what goes up must come down, because I thought everything would just go up. Pay yourself first, of course, and there's a reason they call it a market, because there's no guarantees. And then he'd tell you a story about a client who was never named, even if the person passed away a long time ago. He would tell you how they turned this much money into that much money by doing this. And it was always, patience, patience, patience. The fifth thing's kind of been touched on, looking at boats. Every day, would look at a boat, want to buy the boat. Nah, don't want to buy the boat. Well, let me go back, look at the boat again. Sometimes buy the boat. Well, a month later, I don't want the boat. And it just went on for a long time. The political buttons, that's been discussed. Watching TV. He loved to watch TV in a recliner. And it would, it'd be sports, it would be Wheel of Fortune, or it'd be an old movie. And 50% of the time, he wasn't watching a movie, he was asleep. So making plans with Desey. So here's how that process went. You would make a plan. He'd call you back in 2 minutes to confirm that the plan's happening. 2 hours later, he'd call you back to tell you that he's thought about it and he wants to change the plan. He'd be like, okay, I'm at work this whole time going on and I'm getting calls, texts, calls. 7 hours later, well, I think we're going to go back to the first plan, and then reconfirm that plan. And then you'd get to the restaurant you were going to, and he'd ask the waiter their name 5 times so he could remember it. He would keep in, all right, got it. And then you would have a nice meal, and then the minute he finished his food, can I get the check? Another thing he liked was buying gifts for people. He loved, doing nice things for people. Anytime we saw a policeman or a firefighter at a restaurant, he insisted on paying for their meal. With my son, he loved buying him gifts. He would call me 2 or 3 times a day to ask me if the gifts he had would be okay. And he just loved, making people happy. And the 10th thing that he loved in his life was my mother. He adored my mother. And, I would always go to Desey to vent when we would, have disagreements, which were plenty. And he'd always be like, it'll all be fine. Your mother loves you. And then he would go on a rant about how much he loved her and how she was the greatest thing that ever happened to him. But anyway, he was a wonderful person and, lived a great life. 86 years is a great life. Thanks.
Now I'd like to invite Desey's grandchildren, Emily and Eric, to share some personal words.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Emily. We all know that Poppy had a very youthful way about him that he carried throughout his life. He valued his youthfulness so much that he made it very clear he did not want to be a grandfather before his 50th birthday. I am the oldest grandchild, and I was born 9 days before his 50th birthday. I like to think that he got over it very quickly because he immediately arrived in Beaumont, where I was born, at the hospital with an infant-sized Santa Claus outfit for his brand new Jewish granddaughter to wear. His antics continued year after year. He was always coming up with adventures to take me on, or he was working on projects, gifts that he built for us. We went on trips to the beach and the lake and an infamous fishing trip, which you will learn about from my brother, and his favorite, the Barnum and Bailey Circus. He truly loved the circus. He was so concerned when the original Barnum and Bailey animal cracker box design was being discontinued that he bought 4 boxes for my little girls and told them we needed to keep them safe on a shelf somewhere because they could be worth a lot of money someday. I don't think he factored in the strife as a parent that I had trying to explain to my little girls why we couldn't eat the animal crackers. Hattie and Sophie, his great-granddaughters, are away at summer camp right now, but they were Poppy's biggest fans. He enjoyed writing and mailing riddles to them that he made up, and he would leave a little space on the back for them to write the answer. But they're in the technology age, so they just picked up the phone, and they'd call and give him the answers. And then they would eagerly share some riddle they had made up in a 30-second period to share with him. They never made any sense to me, but he would always laugh and try to help them analyze why they made sense to him. They always ended their calls with lots of I love yous. And as Todd mentioned, and many of you know, nearly every call with Poppy was not just one phone call. There are usually at least 2 more phone calls that happen immediately after you hang up from the first phone call. Sometimes even 3 or 4 if you're lucky. Ours always started with, hey there, kid, I was thinking. And then he'd go on into whatever it was that he wanted to share. Our last call was one of those. I called him on my way home from New Orleans just a couple of weeks ago and gave him a brief summary of my trip. The call ended, and about 3 minutes later, my phone rings again. My husband and I were laughing in the car as I picked up the phone, knowing that, he'd have some random thing that he had just thought of. But he called me back to quiz himself on all the New Orleans restaurants and the food items that they were famous for. Using that sharp mind of his till the very end, I was happy to humor him through this exercise. I like to think that we all humored him over the years through every special project, every collection, every hobby, and I think he was truly one of a kind, and it was, kind of fun to be on that end of humoring him through all those years of mostly projects and hobbies and jokes.
Well, Emily's always a tough act to follow, so I'll try my hardest. But thanks for everyone for being here, and on behalf of my mother and her siblings and my cousins who are dialed in, really appreciate everyone being here. And Desey, big heart, loved everyone. And so I want to tell, I have one story. I'm going to make it pretty quick. There's been some references to it, that it really exhibits kind of Desey's character and kind of how he treated other people. So, Emily and I grew up in Beaumont, and when he sold his last boat, which sounds like per Todd, maybe there were multiple boat tradings, but when he sold his last boat, he still wanted to go out. So he wanted to take Emily and I fishing, and he hired a fishing guide, this nice man named Terry Ray. And Terry was from some part of East Texas or Louisiana, I'm not sure, but he was a very interesting fellow. And so Poppy, that's what we call Desey, he came to Beaumont, picked Emily and I up. We're so excited. We meet the fishing guide somewhere, I'm not sure, and then we get in his car, and he's towing the boat behind it. And at first pass, we're thinking that's kind of a small boat for where we're going. We were going out basically to the Gulf of Mexico, and it was kind of like a small boat. But so we go, and there's this big bridge kind of as you go into Louisiana called the Rainbow Bridge. If you're familiar, it's pretty big. So we pull over on the side of the road before we, make the up, and Poppy's like, Terry, what's going on? And he's like, well, the battery in the truck is not that good, so I'm going to swap it with the battery in the boat for us to make the up. And, Emily and I are like, alarm bells, but Poppy was like, okay, trust you, Terry, this is your job. So kind of takeaway number one, Poppy really liked to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. He was, a nice guy, and so he trusted this professional fishing guide. So do the swap, and then we get going, and we make it over the bridge, and then I think we swap the battery back, and then we get out onto the water, and again, like I said, it was kind of a small boat, and so we're out there, and I don't think we caught anything, and the boat kind of starts taking on water, and one thing happens, I don't know, it's kind of crazy, and the boat flipped over, and we're like out there in the, we're not really near the shore, so, I'm glad Poppy made it till 86, because I thought that was going to be kind of a situation, but he made it. He's a pretty good swimmer. We had life jackets, so we were good. So we waved down another boat to come and help us out, and so they put us on that boat, and then they tow our guide. They tow his boat all the way in, upside down. So by the time we get to the dock, the guys flip over that boat, and it's ruined. It's been dragged across a bunch of rocks, and all of his fishing gear is all broken. And, Emily and I are freaking out, but, Poppy's like pretty even-keeled, level-headed about it, and we leave. And then, I find out, a month later or so that Poppy had sent Academy gift cards to Terry Ray to replace all of his fishing gear and help rebuild the inside of his boat, and to the guys that towed us in. So despite it being a pretty traumatic experience, he was the bigger man and really made the guy whole, even though it was really his fault. So, I think that just goes to, I don't know if I would have done that, but you didn't have Yelp reviews back then, so I guess Desey just had a guy. But long story short, I think everyone's here to honor a great man who we all have a lot of life lessons to take away from, and just I hope everyone can try to live like he did, and I think you'll have a pretty happy life. So thanks for coming.
And now I'd like to invite Carol to share her personal words.
You're cute. I have to say thank you. This is one of the most outstanding rabbis. She's done a phenomenal job. Unbelievable. Love this lady. We're lucky to have her. Cantor Feibush, welcome. This is, I believe, your first funeral, and you're doing great, but not in his career. From the bottom of our heart, we want to say thank you to anyone that drove or flew in to come to this service. It really, really touched our hearts. Okay, go for it. Today could be your lucky day. I was a smart aleck 30-year-old something, and Desey was walking down the street, and the stranger became my husband down the road. Desey was named for his grandfather from Mahia, who was actually named Julius Desey Desenberg. His grandfather had partnered with some friends in Mahia and discovered one of the first oil wells in Texas. Every summer, Desey and his sister Diane would ride the train from Houston to Mahia to see his grandmother and aunts and cousins. The best part was the train ride and eating in the dining car. Every holiday of his childhood was spent in Mahia. His parents had met at the University of Michigan, fell in love, and moved to Houston to join an automotive distributorship. During World War II, his dad was stationed at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. Helen, his mother, would take him and Diane all over D.C. to different sites every week. And I think that's where he got his love of the military. When he was at San Jacinto High School, he was a big deal in the ROTC. Desey wanted to get Best Dressed Cadet, so he carried his clothing all day. He got the award. University of Texas, he told me he had a laugh a day, that he was in Littlefield Fountain regularly from the fraternity gigs. After college, as you've heard, the Navy was one of his favorite things. But I have to tell a cute story. They had a problem with a soda machine. It wasn't working, and they're out to sea. And he pulls in a few enlisted guys, and he says, you know, we're going to have a big roll tonight. Think y'all can help me with this machine. Next morning, the machine was missing in action. It got thrown overboard. After Navy, it was time for a career. He had told me he thought he was only going to be at Merrill a few years because he wanted to start his own company. During the interview, however, he wowed him. He said, I want my name after Merrill Price Finner and Bean. He trained many of the new trainees in New York. Every month he'd go to New York, stay at the plaza, have a heck of a fun weekend, and come back to Houston. He became a mentor for many, many brokers today, I think, that are still practicing. When we dated, he said, you tell me these stories about what a big deal he was at Merrill Lynch, and I'm sitting there going, okay, I'm sure you are. Well, my account wasn't with Desey. It was with another broker because I didn't believe in mixing money and dating. So it was time we got engaged, and I said, you know, I guess I got to move my account to Desey. So I called my broker, and I said, I'm getting married. I'm engaged. I'm going to marry Desey. He says, wow, you're marrying the big kahuna. And I went, oh boy, here we go. The large family was seated in his Mahia days. He wanted a family like his grandmother with everybody around. He got his wish. He loved to share his success stories of his kids with his friends. He would brag that Dana had her own law practice, was so proud of Julie's sales achievements and awards. His happiest time at Merrill was when John was with him, and loved to go see the homes that Todd was in the middle of developing. And then came grandkids, and the two greats. They were pretty special to Desey. He would take a handkerchief out of his pocket, I don't care where we were, he'd roll it up and make it in that stupid snake that jumped. And the kids all were trying to get the snake, and then he'd make a bunny rabbit out of it. He made doll houses, train sets, played rock, scissors, paper, loved to play with them. If you knew Desey, you were in for a sales experience without knowing it. Took me years to understand that when he'd go to the doctor, he'd come home and say, everything's okay. And I kind of knew differently. He only would hear the good news because he never tuned out anything else. One time when it was time for a quadruple bypass, Julie and I were there after he'd had the angiogram. It was a Friday, and his blood pressure was about 200 over, I don't remember what. And they said, you're not going home. Of course, he was ready to go. I said, no, we're not going to my house for an experience. So he decided he was going to talk to the doctor. Let's try one of those stents on Monday and see how it works. Needless to say, medicine took over, and he experienced a successful quadruple bypass. I'll always be grateful to Desey. He took on raising my son. Like Todd said, he was 11 years old. And when we got married, we had some fun times together. One time we got a huge phone bill. This is 25, here he goes, Mom. And it was from a city we didn't know anyone in. And I said, Desey, you know anybody there? You been doing business there? No, I don't know anyone there. I called AT&T. We got the same bill the next month. And I said, and Desey went out. It was when the phones that you take off the hook, handheld deals, first came out, and everybody said, someone's getting into your phone. You need a new phone. Poor Desey goes out, buys a new phone. Okay. A few weeks go by, I called AT&T again. I went, I don't know what's going on. Our wires are crossed, something's wrong. I get a phone call in the office from AT&T. Did I know anyone in the state of Texas named Todd? I said, I sure do. I gave birth to him. Turned out he had met some young lady in the chat room days. And I suggested they write instead of call. Our marriage was a laugh a day. He always had something hysterical to tell me. We shared career tips with each other, parenting ideas. You knew it was Friday at my house because there were always flowers there. And he'd run into his buddies at the grocery store and he'd say, who are you buying those for? He said, Carol, you're making us look bad. He said, I love to do it. Loved to surprise me with a gift, but he couldn't keep the secret. We always held hands and told each other how much we loved each other. During the pandemic, one afternoon, we decided we wanted to get out, get in the car, go get some seafood. We drove over to the seafood place, sat in the car, and we saw this big sign, margaritas. He and I got a margarita, sat and sipped it in the car, and laughed all the way home. The last few years, we were dealing with so many medical issues. I have so much respect for that man. Never complained. He always tried to do what was asked of him. He showed me and anyone that talked to him his courage. He wanted to live. He surprised every doctor at MD Anderson. We would have a procedure and they'd say, you know, you've got these comorbidities. I don't know that we're going to make it through this. And he would. I mean, he defied any medical situation you can imagine. At the end, when they told us it had metastasized his esophageal cancer, they said, you can eat whatever you want. So today, you probably got a box of Milk Duds. He ate the daylights out of those things. And every afternoon at 5 o'clock was Coke float time. I can't say enough about MD Anderson, who took a diagnosis of 3 to 6 months to 14 months. Okay. His final wish was to die at home with hospice at home, as he'd had enough of doctors, nurses, hospitals, and the nurses waking him up. Last 9 weeks were pretty tough, but he was happy with his remote and renting black and white movies. I also know Comcast loved it too, because our bill was $450 last month. He had his last conversation 3 or 4 nights before he passed away with Adrian. And we were talking about the service, and I said, you know, what prayer would you like? He told us. And I said, what music would you like? Thinking of a song from, the service. He's very serious and very quiet. He looks at Adrian and he says, I want some country music. Thank you for playing it on the way in. After his diagnosis, we were in the car and there was this Chad and Jeremy song. And I'm going to read the words because they kind of sum everything up for me. They say that all good things must end someday. Autumn leaves must fall. But don't you know it hurts me so to say goodbye to you. Wish you didn't have to go, no, no, no. And when the rain beats against my window pane, I'll think of summer days again and dream of you. God bless him. He was the best. I hope I did okay. It wasn't too long.
And now as we think and reflect on all of the wonderful stories and memories we have with our Desey, we'll invite Cantor Feidbush to lead us in singing Shalom Rav, our song and prayer for a great and abundant peace.
Shalom Rav Yisrael Amecha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amecha Tasim Leolam. Ki Atahu Melech Adon L'chol HaShalom. Ki Atahu Melech Adon L'chol HaShalom. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. V'tov b'einecha levarech et Amecha Yisrael b'chol eit u'b'chol shah b'shlomecha. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam.
There's a beautiful reading we share at the start of the new year on the High Holy Days. It reminds us of our path and journey through life, and one that Desey especially appreciated. It teaches us birth is a beginning and death a destination, but life is a journey, a going, a growing from stage to stage, from childhood to maturity and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion, and then perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength or strength to weakness, and often back again, from health to sickness and back we pray to health again, from offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, but life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage made stage by stage, from birth to death to life everlasting. Earlier this morning, the family and I accompanied Desey to his final resting place, where we shared our traditional prayers and participated in one of the highest mitzvot of any in our tradition. And so as our time here draws to a close, I would ask and remind all of you, as we continue to remember Desey throughout the week, that his name will be read at Shabbat services in the Gordon Chapel Friday evening at 6:30 p.m. You're welcome to join us in person or via live stream through our website. And following the conclusion of our service this afternoon, please to remain in your places for just a moment so that Cantor Feibush and I can escort the family into Wolf Tumim Hall for a meal of condolence. We know that Desey would want everyone to take a little nosh before they departed today. And so as we continue to reflect on Desey's life and its meaning, for all that was good and enduring, in just a moment we'll share our prayer of Mourners Kaddish, as it's important for us to remember that this is not a prayer that speaks of death or salvation or asks the question why, but rather an offering of praise and thanks to God, those enduring blessings that will continue to be a source of comfort to all who are touched by Desey's spirit. So in his honor and in his memory, we rise as we join together in these sacred words. Yit gadal v'yit kadash shemei rabbah, v'alman divrach yirtei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayachon v'yomechon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, v'agala v'zman kariv yimru amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevarach le'alam amei almaya. Yit barach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei kudusha b'richu. Le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata, tush bechata v'nechemata, damiran v'alma v'yimru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Oseh shalom miromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn, and bring comfort to all of the bereaved among us, as together we all say, Amen. Thank you for being here with us today. We'll see you in a few moments in Wolf Tumim Hall.